Now, let us say a very good morning and a happy new year to Helen Dale. Helen, how are you?
Not too bad at all. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's nice and frosty here in London. I imagine it is out there in the
Yes, it
countryside.
is. It's still below freezing. There's frost on the grass.
Lovely, very nice too. Proper winter, that's what we want. Now, Novak Djokovic is probably currently giving 7 bells of hell to his manager, who probably told him that, don't worry, Novak, you get on the plane. We've managed to get you an exemption. It's all good. And while he's in the air, the manager gets roasted because it turns out that it's not actually sorted, and it's become a huge political football, never mind tennis ball.
Yeah, new balls, please.
Yes.
Last night you retweeted me, and I have had like 50 people in my mentions making the new balls, please joke, which is very good. It's funny. It was certainly funny.
Listen, it's topical, isn't it?
As far as I can understand, and we are still in the fog of news, and I have been squatting on the Australian newspaper's website. That's the paper that I write for, and I covered Brexit for, trying to get to the bottom of this. But we are very much still in the fog of news, and it is unclear what is going on. But as I understand it, and this is subject to revision, so don't assume that anything I'm saying here is the fount of all wisdom, because it may very well not be, is that Djokovic had a legitimate exemption to getting the vaccine, and that exemption was granted by ATAGI, which is the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation.
Right.
It wasn't the Victorian government, it wasn't the federal government, it was an independent Quango, statutory body. And remember, they tend to work properly, Quangos do, in Australia.
Do they?
It seems to be...
How unusual. We don't have that experience in this country.
No, you don't. And it's even worse in America. It's why you get Australians making comments. They go to the US and they go, oh my God, it's a failed state, because nothing seems to work for them. So ATAGI provided this, appears to have, unless it emerges in the court case here, the hearing on Monday, because there's been an adjournment. No injunction, just an adjournment, because the court needs the paperwork. And the court's already said that we need Djokovic's paperwork on Saturday, and then we need the federal government and the Victorian government and Tennis Australia's responses on Sunday. So they've already said that.
That tells me, Helen, that they're looking for a resolution out of this, which is good for them, i.e. that Novak Djokovic will be able to play. They're sort of giving him, because they could have just said today, you know what? Sorry, we're not letting you in. When you had COVID, it was too long ago, so the antibodies don't count. And also, you're not really providing us with enough paperwork already, so you can just go get on the next plane and go back home. But so by giving him his extension, I wonder whether they're actually trying to give him a way out of this.
I don't know. Another part of the reporting, and remember the information I'm putting together here is coming from multiple sources. Another part of the reporting, there's 2 parts of it, is one, it appears that Tennis Australia has provided the same form letter to other people. Now, some media reports are saying it's only 2, one other player and one other official or manager for the entourage that tennis players have. And I have read other reports saying that it's up to 25 people. Now, the Australian is saying it's only 2, and I would go with the Australian at the moment because it's a more reliable news source. But this could develop, fog of news. So there's that. And the other thing that has come out is that it appears that Djokovic's manager, which gets back to your earlier point about the manager screwing up, applied for the wrong subclass of visa.
Oh dear.
There is a specific visa in Australia for people who have vaccine exemptions that doesn't just apply to COVID. Australia has very strict vaccine rules for all of the other illnesses, anything that, like particularly for things that the country, like for example, Australia has no rabies and doesn't want rabies introduced into the country. That kind of thing.
I'm pretty sure he hasn't got rabies, but you can't be absolutely certain, can you? But the thing is, right, it's become this mad situation, like everything in the world now. Here we've got the Prime Minister of Australia having a go at the state of Victoria, the state of Victoria having a go at him, the people running the tennis tournament all kind of at 6s and 7s. Nobody seems to know what the actual law is here.
Well, there are 2 things that are clearly known, is Tennis Australia and the Australian Open are very much Victorian institutions, and the Australian Open is played at the Rod Laver Arena in Melbourne. So that's very Victorian. However, constitutionally, visa rules are set by the federal government, and the Victorian government cannot intervene on those. But there's already been leaks. The Australian already has a leak of some correspondence between Tennis Australia and the federal government, where already going back last year, there were shots being fired across the bow from the federal government, from Border Force and the Home Affairs is the equivalent of Home Secretary in Australia, Karen Andrews. So the Priti Patel's counterpart in Australia is a lady called Karen Andrews, and she's already been saying for some months, you guys are pushing the envelope about how many exemptions you're trying to get and how many rules you're trying to change. And do put this in context in Australia. Many people, including many Australians, including the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, are opposed to compulsory vaccination. Okay, people don't like that. That's widely unpopular. Outside of the European Union, outside of those countries with Roman law traditions where it's more part of their culture. In the UK, it's proven unpopular. It played a part in the North Shropshire by-election. It's an issue in Australia, those kind of things. Right. Very few people, regardless of politics, are opposed to a sovereign national government setting border.
Yes. Well, it seems to me, Helen, that a lot of Australians have said that they're not happy about him being given an exemption in the first place, because as far as they're concerned, you know, if it's one rule for him and a different rule for them, then that's not in any way equitable. But I wonder whether, as an Australian living abroad, Helen, you feel that this will kind of further almost isolate Australia, because it's so far away anyway from the rest of the world, that people are now looking upon it as a bit of an odd place. And I don't know whether that's fair, but I think that's what people are thinking.
Part of the issue, the reason why there's been so much outrage in Australia, and to get this right, I actually talked to some Australian friends, had quite a long chat with them last night so that I could present good information here to you and to Talk Radio listeners. Remember the controversy over the parties in number 10 and how they really did play a very significant role in that by-election, in the North Shropshire by-election. And it was rules for some, not for the little people. Now, Australia has those cultural values much, much more intensely than the United Kingdom. There have been far fewer breaches by celebrities or politicians in Australia than there have been in the UK or the US. You've seen almost none of it. The worst of it was Dan Andrews took a holiday at the wrong time.
I remember that.
He's the Victorian Premier. And he absolutely got the snot blown out of him and started to crash in the polls and basically had to grovel, because Australians have a much more intensely communitarian and egalitarian culture. So you don't get this cultural thing that has emerged here, and we've seen it with the Bristol acquittal, even though it was by the jury, so you need to respect what the jury held. You don't have this thing that where people can get away with something because they're from an ethnic minority or because they're posh or a politician or a celebrity. That is judged much more harshly in Australia. And so that aspect of the outrage that, Novak Djokovic is Novax Djokovic, as he's being called, is getting an exemption on the basis that he's a celebrity and a sports star and he's won all these Grand Slams, really bites Australians right where it hurts in terms of their egalitarian cultural traditions. And do remember, one of the things that a lot of people, including many people in this country and in the United States and in France, admire about Australia is the fact that not only does it have borders, it enforces them.
Yes. Well, woe betide anybody that would try and compare that to this country. I mean, if we had the sort of border control Australia had, we'd be in a much better place. Stay where you are, though, Helen, because we're going to come back and talk about that book review you did, which is all about status and why people want it and what they try to do in order to get it. We've got lots more to do. How about this from Philip in Bournemouth, who says, "Good morning, Mike. I've never in my life wanted children. I've always seen them as an inconvenience and do not like being around them. What sort of a parent would I make? Does the Pope not think that I have freedom of choice? He's an idiot. I definitely would like to, though, have a couple of dogs." Well, listen, I think it's a bit harsh calling the Pope an idiot. But listen, it's a sort of a holy day, isn't it? It's like the Epiphany today. And the Catholics, of course, all like to listen to what the Pope has to say. We'll be talking to Kevin O'Sullivan later on, who has a dog but no children. Is he selfish? We'll find out. This is Talk Radio.
Good talk. Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio. Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
Here's your weather on Talk Radio TV. Waking up to a very cold day, dry to start with, but wind and rain will spread eastwards as the day goes on. Now, looking across the UK today, many areas are looking mostly cloudy, although there will be a few brighter breaks for the southeast. Coldest along the east coast, with Newcastle waking up to -1. Warming up to 7 degrees in the west as we move into the afternoon, but heavy rain will set in for most of the UK, so do take an umbrella. And stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
New best recipe ever. Talk Radio.
Captivating, campaigning, controversial. Powered by common sense.
May cause mild irritation.
The word on the street.
Standing up for the little guy.
Rewire your thinking.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republican Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. We will be taking lots of your calls coming up very shortly. We'll be talking about the Pope and his assertion that if you have pets but no children, you're actually quite a selfish individual. Extraordinary statement from him, really. You'd have to say. But I'm going to be putting it to Kevin O'Sullivan, who does have pets and no children. And he's very, very high and excited about having dogs. Has always had them as far as I've known him for many, many years. And has never really been that interested in having kids. But listen, everybody's up to each their own. Now, we're talking to Helen Dale right now. We've been talking about the Novak Djokovic scenario, which rumbles on down in Australia. Before we talk about this new book by science writer Will Storr, Helen, that you've reviewed in CapX, I think it is. I just wanted to get your view roughly on the whole jury situation down in Bristol, because it's quite an interesting and, for me, rather dangerous precedent. And we've seen two examples of it now. One with Extinction Rebellion, where a judge basically dismissed all charges against some people and said, yeah, well, they might have been guilty of doing it, but actually what they did was for the right reasons, and therefore I'm not going to punish them for it. And here in Bristol, a jury, as directed by a judge, to say that, well, they should be on the right side of history, and it may well be that they were banged to rights, but what they did wasn't actually wrong. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
I defer to Harry Miller's points about the police, but what appears to have happened, and once again, and I'll say this from practitioner experience, it is notorious that the press report trials inaccurately. So first of all, there's no precedent here because it's only a county court decision. And the jury appears to have ignored a direction from the bench because the Crown case was overwhelming.
But when you say there's no precedent, you speak as somebody who is knowledgeable of the law, and you know what precedent actually means. I'm talking about precedent in a more sort of layman's term, which is that, people who commit these types of crimes are going to think, well, I'm not going to get punished, I'm just going to carry on.
Well, this is the problem you've got. I mean, I'm a great admirer of the jury system, and I want the jury system to continue. So this is why I have a lot of respect for the decisions that juries make. But there is a tradition in common law systems known as jury nullification. Now, jury nullification emerges even when the Crown case is overwhelming, or the state's case in the US is overwhelming, and it's bang to rights, to use your expression, the jury nonetheless still acquits. Yeah. Now, this is the first time that many people have seen jury nullification in Britain outside of a very specific area. Notoriously, you've seen jury nullification historically in these islands in drug offences, and it's one of the reasons why Peter Hitchens argues that marijuana, cannabis possession particularly, has effectively been decriminalised, because when it's put to a jury, the jury won't convict, because jurors have this sense, I mean, this is the problem, when you use the jury system, you're relying on the common sense of the great British public that a law is a bad law. And so they refuse to convict even when the law is very powerful.
Because that's a good example you pick up there, because the end result, or the next logical step of that situation, is that if a jury won't convict, then police will find themselves not arresting and charging people. And so therefore it does effectively become something which is no longer an offence, even though technically it's against the law.
This is absolutely correct, and you saved me having to say the next piece because you've explained it so perfectly. And then you move along to the final point. When juries persistently nullify in a particular area, and this has happened historically in the United Kingdom with two other offences, or that were historic. One is still an offence and the other one is no longer an offence. And juries nullify so frequently, it brings the law into disrepute. And you are placed in a position where you either change the law or, to use a phrase from an American writer, Henry David Thoreau, put all just men in prison. Now, when this happened historically in Britain, it happened with abortion, and it happened when infanticide was treated as murder. Now, what happened was it became impossible for the Crown to secure convictions when women were charged with abortion. So their first strategy in the 19th century was to stop charging the women who had abortions, because juries refused to convict, and charge the doctors who did it. And they ran into the same problem. Jurors wouldn't convict. Then the other problem they had in parallel with this was infanticide, the killing of a child under the age of 12 months, usually by the mother, but not always. Often, sometimes it's by the father. It became very difficult to secure a conviction because it involved incarceration, what lawyers call a custodial sentence. And so what happened in 1922, the legislation was changed to make infanticide a separate offence. That meant that was very seldom dealt with a custodial sentence. It was usually dealt with what is sometimes called a mental health referral, because often it was as a result of postnatal depression, which was something that we were just learning about at the time. With abortion, as everybody knows, the legislation was simply changed. The old law was repealed, and the 1967 Abortion Act was enacted. That is a clear example, well-documented historical example that many lawyers know, and I was certainly taught it at law school and I've seen it in practice, is when jury nullification becomes so pervasive, the law becomes an ass, it's brought into disrepute, and the government either has to reconfigure the law, as it did with infanticide, make it a separate offence, treat it differently, or it has to change the law.
Yes.
Now,
so it's kind of precedent by stealth, isn't it, in a way?
It would have to be. You would have to get many, many more cases of criminal damage, in this case vandalism, criminal damage, being treated in this way by juries for that law to be changed. And I did see a comment yesterday by a chap who also writes for CapEx quite a lot. His name is, I'm probably going to mispronounce his name now, Ben Ramanauskas, I think it's a Baltic name. And he made the point, he said, be very careful of this, because whilst a lot of people clearly didn't like that Colston statue, and it's been an ongoing sore in Bristol civic politics for decades. If someone knocked over a Nelson statue or a Wellington statue or a Churchill statue, then you might find a jury more inclined to convict because they formed a particular view about what is valuable and important in terms of cultural memory. So jury nullification, it exists. It's an important and valuable part of the common law. It is something that we have in order to capture the common sense of the great British public or the great Australian public or countries that have jury trials. We do that, but it is also fraught with danger. It's like a lot of good things can be in excess can become bad. It's just the nature of things.
Yes. No, I think that's right. But it'll be interesting to see if these four decide to go off and do something else now, empowered as they may well be by the sort of endorsement, if you like, of the jury system in the country. But let's talk, because we only got a couple of minutes left, about your review of Will Storr's book, The Status Game.
Status Game.
Which is all about why people in various ways, means and on various platforms try to make out that they're more important than somebody else.
What Will Storr has done in this book, it's called The Status Game, on social position and how we use it, is provide with a great deal of research, but also very fluent writing. So it's not too technical. If you haven't done a biology A level, it doesn't matter. He provides the evolutionary history of social status and why human beings compete for it. And biologists have worked out there's three kinds of social status that people compete for. dominance, virtue, and competence. Dominance is the classic, you and I both have Scottish ancestry, the square goal outside, go and have a punch up, dominance status. It's nearly always male. And it's much, much rarer amongst humans than it used to be. The other two, virtue status and competence status, are non-violent ways of achieving status. Virtue status is tied to religion and to politics, but also the idea that you should be kind, like you see on Twitter, or be generous, or be loyal, or those
we
kind
know
of things.
we know what those people are like. You know, there's plenty of them knocking
exactly. And competence status is being good at something,
Yeah.
but not just good at something that benefits you. It's being good at something that benefits everybody else as well. And what Storr goes on to argue very persuasively is the problem with virtue status is it pervades social media, and he then documents very thoroughly how virtue status can be a backdoor way to achieve dominance status. So instead of having to be bigger and stronger than your opponent and beat them up, virtue status allows you to dominate them in another way by attempting, or often appearing to the general public to be more moral and more decent.
Yes.
And that is very dangerous, because when it's happened historically, and he's got a long section on communism, it motivated a lot of the early communists, who then went on to think that they were absolutely the best people on the planet, totally marvelous and totally moral, while they were perpetrating genocides and killing millions of people.
Well, I mean, without the last bit, there's lots of that going on in our current society, which is fascinating. But we're out of time, unfortunately. We'll have to pick it up again, Helen. Thank you very much indeed. Helen Dale there with her views on the Colston 4, the Novak Djokovic scenario, and, of course, the status problem. I'll tell you what, there are an